Hello, this is David Gordon Koch reporting for the NB Media Co-op from Moncton. Welcome to another edition of the NB Update brought to you by the NB Media Co-op in partnership with CHCO Television. This edition of the show is part of our Labor Update series featuring voices from the labor movement here in New Brunswick. Today we'll hear from the president of QP 1190, which represents general labor and trades workers who work for the province. They recently concluded a collective agreement. We'll get the details. This edition also features women in the labor movement speaking about pressing social issues, including intimate partner violence. Those interviews were conducted by our volunteer, Connor Kelly. But first, we'll hear from labor economist Jim Stanford. He's the director of the Centre for Future Work based in Vancouver. He spoke to our volunteer, Lance Francis, about American tariffs and how they will affect workers. Stay tuned.
Thanks for joining us today, Jim.
It's my pleasure to be with you, Lance. Thank you for having me.
The United States has waged a trade war against Canada. President Donald Trump is obviously unpredictable, but what kind of effects can Canadian workers expect?
Well, we're likely to see some major disruptions and layoffs in export industries first, but that will spread through the rest of the economy, unfortunately. So export industries run from natural resources like forestry or minerals and energy, agricultural products, manufactured goods, seafood, any of those things where we produce mostly for foreign markets. And generally, we depend very much on the U.S. as our biggest foreign market. We send between 75 and 80% of all of our exports to the U.S. So what Donald Trump is doing with these tariffs and threats of tariffs is disrupting those export flows, and that's going to mean trouble for people who work in those industries. But remember, everything in the economy kind of fits together. So if we had big layoffs in a natural resource sector or in manufacturing or seafood processing, then that's going to spread through the community because those workers won't have a job. They won't have money to spend. So everything else that they buy, from Tim Hortons coffee to paying for their rent or their home, is going to be hurt because of the loss of export jobs. So most economists think that we will face a recession in the next couple of years in Canada if Mr. Trump goes ahead with these threats. The ultimate challenge, Lance, is going to be that we have to kind of reorient and redirect our whole economy so that we're no longer as dependent on the U.S. to sell the stuff that we make. And that is going to be a big historic challenge. Even if Mr. Trump said next week, you know what, guys, I was only kidding, we're not going to have any tariffs, we'd still suffer because of the erratic nature of his policies. And companies have no faith that he'll stick to his word, and with good reason. So next month, it could be on again. And for that reason, we're going to lose a lot of investment from Canada, from companies who don't believe that they can reliably access the U.S. market from a Canadian location. And now we're going to have to go to those companies and say, look, we've got other reasons to invest in Canada. You can produce here. You can sell the stuff in Canada. We're going to do more trade amongst ourselves in Canada. You can sell stuff to other countries. We're going to try and develop other export markets in Europe and Asia and so on.
And what should the labor movement in Canada do to respond?
Well, workers and their trade unions, of course, are in the crosshairs here. And part of Trump's strategy is to basically try and steal some of our best jobs in the auto industry, the energy sector, the forestry sector, and other industries. So the workers have got a huge amount at stake here. So their unions obviously have to be educating their members. They have to be negotiating with the companies here in Canada and saying, look, I know this is hard, but don't even think about shutting down in Canada. Don't even think about that. You'll pay real consequences if you try to shut down in Canada and just move everything to America. That leaves us stranded, and we're not going to tolerate it. And then unions will have to be working with provincial and federal governments around a plan to protect those industries, to support them, to support the workers. A lot of people are going to be laid off because of this. So we're going to need stronger employment insurance benefits, or perhaps even something like the CERB. If you remember the CERB payments that were paid out during the COVID pandemic, We're going to need something like that so that no one loses their home or their families because of this crisis. We got to stand together.
Mm. In Canada, a trade war has led to calls for construction of pipelines and faster approval for mining projects. But Indigenous communities have resisted many of these projects. Can you comment on this tension?
There's a bit of I think, a knee-jerk reaction from some, I would say, mostly vested interests in the resource sector to say, well, the solution to Mr. Trump's attack is to uh, dig more stuff out of the ground and sell it maybe to other countries. And there's all kinds of questions. One of them is the economic viability there. It's not at all clear that across Canada, oil pipeline is economically feasible. Secondly, every industry, not just oil and gas, faces a challenge about, figuring out where we're going to invest and where we're going to sell our stuff. Of course, Indigenous communities are right in the middle of that because it's their land and their resources that these industries want to use, even to build pipelines through. And we absolutely have to continue to respect the rights of Indigenous peoples and the environmental assessments and protections that we have to have in place. So I think there are some folks in Canada who think this is an opportunity to profit for themselves and their own industry, and that's quite wrong.
We've also been hearing calls for government to slash spending, similar to Elon Musk's so-called Department of Government Efficiency. What do you think?
Well, I mean, we're going to need to do more work, not less work. And that includes the work that we do through our broader public sector. Everything from education to healthcare to social services to cultural planning and infrastructure. In fact, those industries will become more important, not less important, because of Trump's attacks. We're going to have to strengthen all of the industries that are more focused on domestic activity rather than exports. And the public sector is focused on domestic activity. It's services that we produce in Canada for Canadians. Especially with all this disruption, there's a lot of Canadians who are going to have to consider other careers. So we're going to need more education, not less. And so for all these reasons, the idea of cutbacks is absolutely wrong. That would make the recession resulting in our export services or our export industries, that would make that recession even worse. If on top of that, we started laying off people in the public sector as well, that makes no sense at all.
The current crisis has also led calls for people to buy Canadian. What about Canadian companies that are violating workers' rights and Indigenous rights, for example? Is there a danger that this current wave of Canadian nationalism would cause us to overlook our own problems in Canada?
Buying Canadian, I think it will help. It will help to offset some of the damage that's done by the loss of exports due to Donald Trump. There are limits to how much these individual consumer choices will make a difference. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be watching what companies do. A good example here would be the big supermarket chains. We've been arguing in Canada for the last 2 years about how expensive food has become and how much the companies like Loblaws and Metro and Sobeys have been profiting from that. Yes, we all need to pull together, but we have to be, I think, sensible and keep a critical eye on everyone, all the stakeholders, all the industries, all the companies, to make sure that they're not exploiting this crisis for their own profit.
Unifor has been advocating for a while now to have provinces declare intimate partner violence an epidemic. We argue that when the only safe space for a woman to go is her workplace, then I think we can all agree that we are truly in an epidemic. When when shelters are at capacity and there is no safe space for women to go to flee domestic violence, then we are clearly in an epidemic. So Unifor was successful in advocating for intimate partner violence and having it declared an epidemic in Nova Scotia, along with many advocates that came along with us. And we're advocating governments all across the country, but I can speak to the governments in Atlantic Canada to also follow suit and declare intimate partner violence an epidemic. And, we met with organizations in Nova Scotia because it's important that their voices are at the table when we try to find solutions. Because the goal, we talked about funding for shelters and safe spaces, but the ultimate goal is we need to end domestic violence. That is the goal. And what is that going to take? And so we've been talking about actions and action plans to present to government, to present to both provincial and federal governments, and to, really lead us down a path to end intimate partner violence.
So the New Brunswick Federation of Labor Women's Committee has a couple of asks that we're looking for to help with intimate partner violence in the workplace. The first one is workplace safety planning. So it has been a suggestion for a while that workplaces do have workplace safety planning in the case of intimate partner violence. So myself, I am a survivor of intimate partner violence. And I was stalked in my workplace. So it was crucial for me to be able to work for there to be a workplace safety plan. Without that, I wouldn't have been able to work. We're also advocating for paid domestic violence leave. So currently in New Brunswick, there's a total of 10 days of domestic violence leave that is allowed, but only 5 days are paid and the other 5 are unpaid. So we would like all 10 to be paid days for everyone. Another thing that we're advocating for is access to a woman's advocate or other designated support person within the workplace. So now, ideally, this person would be a member of the Occupational Health and Safety Committee that is specially trained about the supports that are available in the area to help the victim of intimate partner violence. And we're also advocating for Clare's Law. So Clare's Law was created because a woman named Claire had a partner who had previously been charged with domestic violence, and he ended up ending her life. Had Claire known that her partner had previously been charged with domestic violence, maybe she might still be here today. So Clare's Law is allowing the RCMP to disclose information to someone that is in a domestic relationship with someone and is at risk. There's a number of factors because in Canada, we do believe privacy is very important, but we also believe that people's lives are very important.
We've met with all kinds of levels of government, where we've met with the government in Newfoundland and Labrador. We've met with the New Brunswick government, presented, what we're interested in doing. Obviously, the Nova Scotia government and the government in Prince Edward Island, we have not heard from yet, but we're anticipating that we're going to be able to do that now. There are a few things, and I'll comment on that, that this is intimate partner violence is a workplace issue because, it's a health and safety issue. I don't know how people are expected to go to work and do their jobs safely with all of that sitting on their shoulders. And so it's a health and safety issue. We talk about, paid domestic violence leave, and that is one thing that Unifor has advocated strongly for across the country. And 5 paid days is lovely, but it is not enough. When somebody's trying to flee domestic violence, there are a lot of things to take care of, a lot of things that you may not think of. And so 5 paid days, but there's also guidelines around these 5 paid days. And in order to take advantage of the 5 paid days, many times employers have to know why. And, there's a lack of confidentiality there. And sometimes the two people work in the same environment, which actually poses challenges as well. So, I think that that workers have to be part of the conversation when it comes to creating this type of legislation and these guidelines around the legislation. That labor has to be part of that dialogue because we understand It's great intentions, but we understand the difficulties with having to disclose why you'd be taking these days off. So there's challenges out there that we're definitely talking about and facing head on. Now, one thing that we are doing is we are going through the 4 Atlantic provinces, including New Brunswick, and on June 6th, Unifor is going to be hosting an intimate partner violence symposium, where we're going to be bringing people together, and the premier has committed to attending in Fredericton, where we're going to have a panel of people come in and talk about intimate partner violence. And then we're going to have some speakers come in and talk about their story of survival. And it's going to be a very inspiring day, but we need to find solutions. That is our ultimate goal, is to find solutions in how are we going to work together, labor and organizations, even outside of labor, along with government, to end domestic violence once and for all.
Tasha, you recently gave a presentation to WorkSafe New Brunswick. Would you be able to talk about some of the issues that you brought up to them?
So one of the first issues we talk about is menstrual product access. So menstruation is a natural part of life. Um, n- all employers are required to have toilet paper in all washrooms, but effective December 15th, 2023, all federally regulated washrooms were required to have menstrual products in all washrooms. So in the designated female washroom, the designated male washroom, and the all-access washroom, they're all required to have menstrual products, and a variety of menstrual products are to be available. A lot of people don't even know that that happened. So it's not like it was a budget breaker. It wasn't very significant, but it did make a difference. And now we want to make a difference for everyone else. We want to help workers avoid missing time from work to get their products. We want to help workers engage more fully in the workplace and reduce negative health effects such as infections and toxic shock syndrome, which you can die from. A lot of people that aren't menstruators don't realize you can literally die from using the product too long. So it's very important that products are available. Now, what we really need to happen is the OHS regulations to be amended. So there's General Regulation 91-191, which states that an employer shall ensure that a washroom is provided with a sufficient supply of toilet paper and hygiene supplies. We would like to change that so that it now includes menstrual products. It's a small change, but could make a huge difference in the fight against period poverty.
So with April 28th is starting to come up, the day of mourning for workers injured on or killed on the job. Um, did you all also make any presentations or talk about legislation for holding employers accountable for workplace deaths?
Yes. So I want to give a shout out to the United Steelworkers, USW. They've really been leading the way on holding employers accountable for workplace fatalities. So the Criminal Code of Canada was amended in 2004. This is known as the Westray Law to hold corporations, their directors, and corporate executives criminally accountable for preventable workplace deaths and injuries. The campaign began over 20 years ago when we were seeing about 1,000 workers die in the workplace per year. We're still seeing the same amount of workers die in their workplace. So as of 2024, there has only been 11 successful prosecutions under the Westray Amendments, 5 in Quebec, 4 in Ontario, 1 in BC, and 1 in New Brunswick. These prosecutions resulted in the conviction of 7 corporations and 3 individuals, but sentences have been relatively minor. So we need to change that. What we need to do to change that, we need to significant investment in prosecuting cases. We need to ensure that the Crown attorneys are educated, trained, and directed to apply the Westray Amendments of the Criminal Code of Canada. We also need to appoint dedicated teams of investigators and prosecutors for workplace deaths, along with mandatory standardized training for such positions. We need more education. So, mandatory training for the police, health and safety regulators, supported by the necessary resources on the proper application of the Westray amendments. As well, we need new procedures. So, mandatory procedures that come into play anytime there's a workplace industry. There needs to be protocols and coordination in every jurisdiction for police, crown prosecutors, and health and safety regulators when a workplace death occurs. Then, after a workplace death occurs, we need to increase the supports for the family. The spouses and children of those killed in a workplace fatality didn't expect their loved one not to come home from work. So they're going to need tremendous mental health supports. And then we also believe that they should have funding for their post-secondary education because the income earner has now passed. They need more support.
Jennifer, would you be able to comment on the trade war that's starting to go on in the United States and what impact that would have, say, for Unifor or for the labor movement in general, especially with the federal election that's going on?
Mm. So I think the first thing we need to address is the time we're in and the time of great uncertainty. And that uncertainty leads to many issues, including, you know, issues with people's mental health. And people are unsure. Am I going to have a job tomorrow? What's inflation going to do? Am I going to be able to pay my power bill? Am I going to be able to buy food for my family? What is all of this going to look like? And so it's a time where we need to rally around each other. There is no doubt. No time more than now, in this moment, do we need to support each other and reach out to each other and make sure that we're okay. And as far as, New Brunswick in particular, with our very large forestry sector, our very large industry, it's going to burst. And the workers are mobilized. The workers are energized because they are not going to sit back and let one job leave this country. They are rallying around their employer. They are rallying around each other. They are rallying around the union, and the union is rallying around them because we need to stand strong together.
I'm here today with Jonathan Goumond, president of QP 1190, which represents over 2,200 general labor and trades workers across the province in the provincial public service. And they recently concluded a new collective agreement with the province. So your members voted last year overwhelmingly for strike action. I understand that major issues included stuff like wages and benefits for the casual employees. Can you talk a bit about the increased wages in your local's new contract?
Yeah, so back then we were offered what the Higgs government considered a wage mandate at that time was 12.5%, which was not feasible for our members. They're some of the lowest wage earners in the province, and 12.5% to them is not what 12.5% is to somebody that makes $100,000, and that was where we kind of drew the line on what's fair here. If you agree, everybody pays the same price at the gas pump in the grocery store and all that. So, our members were frustrated with that offer and trying to put food on the table and get to work. So we negotiated in a flat rate, which is kind of historic to have done that, settle an agreement with a flat rate amount. Over the 4 years was $1, $1.10, $1.30, and then $1.60. So it gave us a total of a $5 an hour increase over a 4-year contract.
Okay. And how much do your workers earn on average? Like, what's the average wage for 1190?
So the average wage between all of there's 13 different pay bands, and the average was probably around 25.44, but 2/3 of our membership are on the lower end of that pay band. At the bottom end of the scale, like $20 an hour, 20.67 and the 21.67 are a big range of a lot of the casual workers at the parks, our casual employees that work for DTI, and then our operation worker ones. So there's a big majority of the group that fall in that category before we settled a new contract of making less than $22 an hour. With the Higgs offer prior to the election at the 12.5, it wasn't even bringing them up to what a cost of living would be in the province of New Brunswick, so to have a living wage. So that's why the members, when we talk strike vote and whatnot, they were determined to have something else, something more.
And I understand that other issues included stuff like food allowances and allowances for the tools that the workers need for their jobs, and that those benefits hadn't been increased in quite a long time, like many years.
The boot allowance was $100, and it hadn't been increased in over 20 years. So we would have, we managed to increase that by $75. So it's $175, along with the tool allowance also, which hadn't been changed or increased over 20 years. They were $250, and it's now $375. The tool allowance. So those are, like I said, those are changes that that probably should have been easier to get adjusted, seeing that they weren't changed in 20 years, but it was still a struggle at the negotiating table. Hopefully next round we'll be more successful in bringing that up some more, that it won't be another 20-year span before it's increased. So hopefully next round of bargaining, we can also work on bringing that up again.
Well, thank you for joining the New Brunswick Media Co-op today. It's been great talking to you.
Well, thank you very much for your time.